Hi everyone, welcome to this channel. Today, we're going to dive deep into something that's often puzzling but rarely explained in detail. Have you ever felt like you're being watched, even when you're alone? In this episode, we're going to uncover one of the creepiest stories you've never heard before. There was something distinctly wrong about the air in Ashcombe. As Eleanor Whitmore stepped out of the rented car, a sharp, biting chill greeted her, colder than anything the season should have allowed. The village was nothing like she'd imagined, forgotten, silent, and untouched by time. Narrow cobblestone paths meandered between crooked stone cottages, their windows clouded and dark, as though the inhabitants inside had long given up looking out. Moss clung to the walls like old wounds refusing to heal. Her arrival wasn't welcomed. The few villagers she passed on her way to the inn either averted their eyes or stared with a mix of dread and recognition. An elderly woman outside a crumbling bakery froze in place, her cloudy eyes fixed on Eleanor as if seeing something buried deep in the past. Without a word, she turned and disappeared into the building. No greetings, no questions. Only silence, and a heaviness in the air, as if Eleanor's presence had reawakened something long dormant. Even the sounds were strange. Not absent, but wrong. The wind whistled through gaps in the rooftops with a hollow, mournful tone, and the distant toll of an old church bell rang though there was no church in sight. At nightfall, the sky turned a flat, grey-black, and the village disappeared into shadow. That first evening, Eleanor sat by her window in the inn, unable to shake the sensation of being watched, not by people, but by the village itself. Ashcombe was a place where time had fractured, where something old and terrible still lingered just beneath the surface. Early the next morning, Eleanor packed lightly, just her notebook, an old map, and her camera, and set off on foot toward Ashwood Manor. The estate was unreachable by car, tucked away in the heart of the forest that loomed like a fortress behind the village. The path quickly narrowed into a trail, barely visible beneath overgrown roots and rotting leaves. Fog clung to the underbrush, thickening with every step, swallowing sound and light alike. It didn't take long before she felt it, an awareness. Something in the woods was watching her. Footsteps echoed faintly behind her, perfectly mimicking her pace, but every time she turned, the trail was empty. The sound would stop, only to start again once she moved forward. At first, she thought it was paranoia, but then came the whispers, soft and rhythmic, like a forgotten language spoken in prayer. They slithered through the fog, too faint to decipher, but persistent enough to chill her blood. The trees grew denser, older. Their trunks were carved with strange symbols, some resembling runes, others unfamiliar even after her weeks of research. One tree had what looked like claw marks, deep and deliberate, leading up toward a twisted branch where a large black bird sat unmoving. It didn't caw, didn't blink. It simply watched. As she moved past it, a gust of wind blew from behind her, unnaturally cold, unnaturally precise, like breath against her neck. She quickened her pace, feeling the forest tightening around her, as if daring her to go further. Then, as if the earth had drawn back a curtain, the fog thinned, and Ashwood Manor came into view. Perched on a low rise, the house stood in defiance of decay. Grand, Gothic, and wrong. Its stone facade was choked with ivy, windows cracked like broken teeth, and the wrought iron gate that encircled it lay half-collapsed in the weeds. The manor looked less like a home and more like a wound left open by time. The front door, tall and splintered, stood ajar. Inviting, yet ominous. The foyer inside was a cathedral of shadows. Dust hung like mist in the shafts of light leaking through stained glass windows, and the grand staircase loomed in the darkness, worn with age. The floor creaked beneath her boots, each step groaning like a memory being disturbed. Portraits lined the walls, generations of the Ashwood family, their features faded or slashed beyond recognition. Yet one portrait, larger than the rest, seemed untouched by time. A young woman with an expression both serene and mournful stared out with eyes that glimmered faintly in the dim light, almost as if reflecting something behind Eleanor that wasn't there. The silence was suffocating. No birdsong, no rustle of animals, only the faint tick of a grandfather clock with no hands. She could feel it already, this place wasn't empty. Something still lived here. Or worse, something had never left. On the second floor, down a corridor that narrowed with every step, Eleanor found a door different from the others. The wood was darker, carved with roses and the initials E.A., Evelyn Ashwood. According to the village's fragmented records, Lady Evelyn was the eldest daughter of the Ashwood lineage, and her disappearance in the late 1700s had never been explained. The door creaked open on its own as she reached for it. Inside, the air was colder than the rest of the house, thick, unmoving. The room was shockingly preserved. A lace-draped four-poster bed, a cracked vanity mirror, and a large wardrobe stood in ghostly stillness. Dresses of silk and lace, long decayed, still hung as though waiting to be worn again. But it was the desk in the corner that drew her attention. Upon it lay a thick black book, its leather cover worn smooth, marked only by a strange sigil resembling a closed eye. Around the book, someone had once placed a circle of salt, now partially broken. Eleanor hesitated, then reached out. The moment her fingers brushed the cover, the house seemed to breathe, an almost imperceptible shift in the air, like something sighing from deep below the floorboards. The book was unlocked, though no key had been found. She picked it up, and somewhere in the manor, something old stirred awake. That night, Eleanor stayed in Evelyn's room. With only a single candle casting a frail glow, she opened the journal. To her surprise, it opened on its own, the pages rustling slowly, deliberately. The first illustration stopped her breath, an ink drawing of a severed hand, bleeding onto a triangle etched with runes. Beneath it, a Latin inscription read, Corpus Manae, anima ligatur. Sanguis est clavum. The body remains, the soul is bound. Blood is the key. As she flipped through the pages, the writing grew more frantic. The early entries detailed Evelyn's days, her doubts, her loneliness. But as the journal went on, the handwriting changed. Shaky, erratic, as if penned in the grip of madness. Strange phrases repeated endlessly. Sketches of circles and symbols appeared on every page, some drawn in what looked suspiciously like dried blood. Then came the final entry, brief and terrifying. Written in thick, red strokes, it simply read, "He calls me from the other side of the mirror." The candle flickered violently. Eleanor turned toward the vanity mirror. For a heartbeat, she saw her reflection, and behind it, a woman in a decayed white dress, staring back with lifeless eyes. But when she spun around, the room was empty. Only the cold remained. And the mirror no longer showed her reflection at all. The next morning brought no light. Though hours had passed since dawn should have broken, Eleanor's room remained steeped in a dim twilight, as though the sun had forgotten to rise. She approached the vanity mirror again, its surface now tarnished with a gray haze that made it hard to distinguish her own face. Yet when she reached out to touch it, the glass rippled, just slightly, as if it were water disturbed by a breath. Something had changed. Objects on the desk had shifted. The journal now lay open to a page she hadn't seen before. It described a ritual, unfinished, interrupted by something referred to only as the returning. There was no mention of what it was, only a warning: the mirror is the threshold, the vessel is chosen, and once awakened, the manor remembers. Eleanor didn't understand the words fully, but a sickening realization crept into her mind. This house, Ashwood Manor, did not just hold memories of the past. It contained them, warped them, played them again like a broken record, binding those who entered into the same unending loop. By afternoon, Eleanor could no longer tell how long she had been inside. Her watch had stopped. The date on her phone changed from one year to another at random, even when she wasn't touching it. Outside the window, the forest no longer looked the same. Trees had grown too close to the house, their roots clawing up through the ground like veins. Time was no longer linear. The manor was pulling her backward. As twilight deepened, Eleanor found herself slipping into waking dreams. She could no longer separate memory from imagination. Shadows moved in the corner of her vision, not fleeting, but purposeful. At times, she saw women in 18th-century gowns walking the hallways, their feet not touching the floor, their eyes hollow with resignation. But the worst was the scene she witnessed while descending the stairs. In the grand ballroom, which she had never entered, stood a figure draped in black robes, holding a silver bowl. Surrounding him were villagers, dozens of them, chanting with their heads bowed. At the center of the circle was a girl, young and frightened, bound to the floor with braided chains of hair. Eleanor blinked, and the scene vanished. Yet when she stepped into the ballroom, the scent of burnt herbs and old blood still lingered. The floor was stained in a perfect circle, the pattern of which matched the final drawings in Evelyn's journal. She had not imagined it. She had seen what the manor had shown her, what it had stored for centuries. The girl had been Evelyn. The ritual had not been stopped. It had been paused. And Eleanor now stood in the place of the vessel. A sudden sound shattered the silence, a deep, slow knock from somewhere below. Eleanor followed the noise, descending past the ground floor to a narrow, rotting corridor she hadn't noticed before. The air was fetid, thick with the stench of decay. Cobwebs clung to her like fingers. At the end of the hallway, behind an old bookshelf, she discovered a door half buried in the wall. Carved into the wood were the same runes from the journal, but deeper, angrier, scored by someone in desperation or madness. With effort, she forced it open. Inside was a winding stone staircase, spiraling downward into darkness far older than the house itself. The temperature dropped instantly. Her breath turned to mist. Each step echoed louder than the last, until she reached a chamber lit by flickering candlelight, though none had been lit by her. The walls were lined with mirrors. Dozens of them. Each one showed a different version of the manor, one in flames, one drowned in water, one empty and ruined. But in every reflection, Eleanor was present, standing, watching, screaming. Only one mirror was blank. And from it, something was watching her back. As she stepped toward the blank mirror, it cracked, veins of black spreading like lightning. A sound followed, not like glass shattering, but like bones breaking slowly. From behind the mirror, a hand emerged, translucent and skeletal, followed by a face half decayed, half beautiful. It was Evelyn. But she was not whole. The eyes held nothing human anymore, only an ancient grief twisted into rage. She had been trapped between death and eternity, her ritual unfinished, her soul bound by those who betrayed her. She had become something beyond a ghost. She was the memory of pain, seeking a vessel to finish what had begun. And now, Eleanor was that vessel. The spirit didn't attack. It entered. The cold hit Eleanor like drowning. Her vision blurred, her heartbeat slowed, and her hands moved on their own. She saw flashes of Evelyn's life, her imprisonment, the betrayal by her own father in the name of some arcane pact with the mirror god. Her last scream echoed across time, and now, through Eleanor. When she regained control, her hands were bleeding. Symbols had been carved into her skin. She tried to escape. Every exit, door, window, passage, led her back into the manor's heart. The house no longer had floors, only loops. Corridors changed behind her. Rooms vanished. She marked the walls with charcoal, only to see the marks appear ahead of her instead. In desperation, she ran to the front door, but it was gone. The manor had absorbed her. Ashwood Manor, once asleep, had awakened. Its hunger returned. And Eleanor, unknowingly, had been lured not to investigate a haunting, but to complete it. Her presence had not been a mistake. The journal, the visions, the mirror, they were all pieces of a puzzle crafted long before her birth. And now, the final piece had fallen into place. As she stood beneath the flickering chandelier, her breath trembling, the mirrors began to hum in unison. A deep voice, not heard but felt, echoed through the beams and stones, "The vessel accepts." The ritual begins anew. And then, the manor went silent again. As if nothing had ever happened. Outside, in the village of Ashcombe, no one noticed she was gone. The house had fed once more. But the fog had grown thicker now. And soon, it would call for another. In the days that followed Eleanor's disappearance, life in Ashcombe went on, quiet, uneventful, forgetful. The villagers, mostly elderly, spoke little of Ashwood Manor. When asked, they'd squint as though trying to recall something just out of reach, then shake their heads slowly, murmuring about roads that no longer existed or storms that had washed memories clean. But a few still remembered. The innkeeper, Mrs. Holloway, once whispered to a passing traveller that the manor had taken someone again. She couldn't recall the name, only that it had been a girl from the city, curious and alone. She warned the traveller not to go looking, for the house did not like being remembered. The more one tried to speak of it, the more silence pressed down upon them. And yet, on the far edge of the village, nailed to an old oak tree, a torn piece of notebook paper flapped in the wind. Written in shaky ink, the words read, "If someone finds this, please tell them I'm still inside." The mirror's lie. No one claimed to have written it. And no one dared remove it. Back inside the manor, though no one alive would see it, a new reflection now appeared in the grand mirror near the staircase. It was Eleanor. Not as she had entered, bright-eyed and determined. This version was quiet, still, her hair falling limp around her shoulders, her hands folded in her lap as if waiting. But her eyes, those were the same. Wide. Watching. Sometimes she moved. When the wind howled, when the candles flared, when the glass across the manor trembled, she would tilt her head slowly, acknowledging something only she could see. And when the night was at its blackest, her lips would part ever so slightly, as if beginning to speak, or perhaps scream. But no sound ever came. Only her gaze. Endless and hollow. And if someone dared to stand too long before the mirror, they might notice that their own reflection had vanished. Strange things began to happen in Ashcombe once more. Cattle were found huddled in circles, unmoving and glazed-eyed. Children refused to walk past certain roads, claiming the shadows whispered names they had never learned. People dreamed of fire in the forest, of a girl in a mirror calling them closer. And each dream ended with the same whisper, "The house is breathing." The manor, buried under fog and moss, seemed to grow larger again, as if unfolding wings made of dust and memory. Tourists no longer appeared on the trail. Some who went exploring never returned. And when search parties were sent, they found only a rusted key lying in the path, warm to the touch. The air itself turned heavier near the tree-line. Devices failed. Birds no longer sang. The land had begun to stir, and with it, the hunger of the house. Weeks later, a photographer hiking through the moors found something odd tucked between the pages of an abandoned leather-bound book at the base of a twisted tree. The book bore no title, but its pages were filled with frantic handwriting, sketches, dates, sigils. Tucked in the back was a torn envelope. Inside it, a photograph, a woman standing before a grand mirror, her face obscured by motion blur, her outline nearly transparent. Scrawled on the back of the photo was a line. "I am not lost. I am bound." It was signed with initials, E.W. The photographer showed it to the village, but no one could explain it. The manor, they claimed, had been empty for generations. Some even argued it had burned down decades ago. But no records confirmed this. It was as though the house slipped between timelines, existing only when remembered, and punishing those who dared to look too closely. The photograph disappeared days later. The photographer, too. Somewhere deep in Ashwood Manor, in a room that does not exist on any blueprint, a ritual begins again. Candles flicker to life in a perfect circle. Shadows dance where no one stands. The air grows dense, humming with words from a language older than the soil. Mirrors along the corridor glow faintly, and in each one, a different figure appears, watchers, remnants of failed vessels, their faces lost to time. Eleanor stands at the center, her feet no longer touching the ground. Her eyes are open now, but her mind is not her own. The sigils on her skin burn faintly, pulsing with ancient rhythm. She is not screaming. She is singing, in the same voice Evelyn once used, carried across centuries like a forgotten melody. And the manor listens. Outside, the fog thickens. Somewhere beyond the hills, another traveler looks at their map and sees a trail that leads nowhere, but feels compelled to follow it anyway. The cycle continues. The house remembers. That was our story for tonight. Do you think it's just an ordinary tale, or is there something more to it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next stories. See you, if you still dare to watch next time.